Hello, everybody, and welcome to this Rewire guide to fibromyalgia. So, my name's James. Um, if you're new to this series, basically, this is a series of videos that I use to give people a starting point that they can kind of take for free when it comes to looking at certain issues, symptoms, or uh, training problems that they may have. I've found over the years of doing consultations with people, the same questions are always coming up again and again. And I figured, let's make it a bit more accessible. Let's try and actually give people as much information as they can ahead of time so that they can try and tackle this thing a little bit on their own before they start shelling out a bunch of money. Okay, so my goal is essentially to let you try a few uh, methods or just think about a few things. And if you start to find that one thing actually seems to be working, then maybe that's the one that is worth a deeper dive, and you can go seek a professional. Could be myself, could be somebody else who can help you further on that journey. So today we're going to be talking about fibromyalgia, and this one is probably one of the more complicated ones that I'll be dealing with in this series. Fibromyalgia, if you're dealing with it yourself, you'll probably know there's not a whole lot of amazing research to show, this is how we do whatever with it, whether, whether it's something we can cure, whether it's something we can improve, reduce symptoms of, whether it's something that we can see like a shift in our habits or whatever. The research is really lacking. And because of that, it's very hard to say conclusively, this is what we need to do. It's almost even hard to say this is exactly what fibromyalgia is. And your experience of this may very well be that, you've been to see lots of medical practitioners, and sometimes it feels like you've got this diagnosis of fibromyalgia specifically because they aren't giving you a diagnosis of something else. What we do know is that there's usually a very strong kind of stress component that could be current stress, previous traumas, or things like that. There is always a chronic fatigue component, and there could be a ton of other things going on as well. Anytime you get chronic pain and stress, there's definitely going to be emotional issues with the nature of chronic pain and stress and inflammation. There's probably going to be issues around visceral functions. So that could be, your breathing, your blood pressure, your digestion, all of those things. And then in addition to that, that makes it really hard to know, is there a root cause that you can find that you can fix when there's so many different things going on at once? And if so, which one do we need to deal with? Do we need to deal with one specific thing first, or do we need to try and deal with everything all at once? So I'm sorry that this is going to be very vague, but there are still some things that we can think about, and that's what we're going to dive into here. So I guess if I was to give my best hypothesis of, what the big challenges or what the big thing that seems to be going on when we're dealing with fibromyalgia is by looking at a part of the brain called the hypothalamus. So the hypothalamus is basically the brain's center for hormone regulation, and it controls a lot of different things. So, your body will go through a hormone cycle over a period of time. The kind of standard is to say that the male cycle is over a 24-hour period, the female cycle is closer to a month. But there seems to be some variation in some of that as well. So it seems like actually even within that, there can be differences, and some things will happen in a day, some things might happen over a longer period of time, and there can be multiple like mini cycles of things going on. That's probably to do with the brain really liking uh, measurements of time. So you've got lots of different clocks in your body. You've got clocks that do things that are really really small, like your heart rate and your arm swing for your walking, and how often you're going to blink and things like that. Then you're going to have much bigger clocks, things that figure out like your circadian rhythms and your sleeping waking cycle, as well as even some changes when it comes to seasons and things like that. When the hypothalamus is struggling, the areas that you're going to see big changes in are going to be with your sleep. So again, hormones big part of getting you to sleep and waking you back up. So that's going to be disrupted. Things like your appetite, knowing when you're hungry or getting the right intensity of hunger signals for the right amount of actual hunger. This is going to cause changes in how you understand how you're feeling. So there's going to be a lot of emotional dysregulation. This will also lead to changes in things like libido and many more things. But when you start factoring in all of these together, anytime I've presented this to somebody dealing with fibromyalgia, they've kind of said, all right, this whole slide of information is just describing me. This is what I'm going through. This is, or the problems and issues that I'm dealing with. The hypothalamus is affected very, very strongly by stress. And that makes sense because obviously stress itself is characterized by hormones. So, stress might be the external thing that's happening to us, but in response, our body has specific stress hormones that it releases in order to change the types of activities that we're engaging in. So, when things are good, we're more in that rest and digest state. We're in a kind of calm, relaxed state where our body can recover, regenerate cells, flush out anything that is, the waste products or the old dead cells. It can digest the food, so it helps absorb all of the nutrients from the food and figure out, whether it needs to store excess energy or whether it can just burn through that. That rest and digest state is super useful for our long-term survival. But then when something more dangerous happens to us, then we start moving into the fight or flight. And that is not concerned about long-term survival at all. It's just concerned about right now, what are we going to do? And because of this, basically, depending on the external levels of stress or threat or danger or whatever you want to call it in our environment, our hypothalamus is going to respond and react to that. And it's going to make changes to all of the things that we talked about. So, you don't need to be asleep when you're in danger. That's probably not a good idea. You don't need a libido. You don't need to be hungry. You just need to be engaged in action right now. Over a really, really long period of time, if we're just constantly in stress or danger, or we're don't even need to be constant, we could just have stressful events that are really, really intense happening uh, one after another, even with, spaces and gaps in between. What you're going to find is the hypothalamus suddenly struggles to regulate itself in the way that it normally would. It's got so used to the idea that it needs to be uh, releasing the hormones for stress, danger, fight, or flight, and it struggles to then get back into the normal rhythms of everyday life. Now, I'm not saying that this is the cause of fibromyalgia. It's not even necessarily my theory of what it is. I just think that when it comes to understanding it, if we just understand like the role of the hypothalamus, it can be really useful because Trying to tackle fibromyalgia from just the point of view of chronic pain actually turns out to be really difficult. It turns out it might not be the best route that we can take. So we absolutely need to learn about pain, and we need to learn what we can do to reduce pain symptoms and things like that. If you are going through this right now, we also have another video in the Rewire Guide, one of the first ones. So you can find it in the playlist, and it's about how to self manage your pain. That will give you a lot of different ideas of different types of movement and different types of things that you can do that will help deal with the pain symptoms and the pain aspect of fibromyalgia. But the problem is, again, we can't ignore the stress side of things. So even if the stress isn't the cause, if you start with lots and lots of pain, that is also going to cause you a high amount of stress, and then you're going to be left with these symptoms. Kind of doesn't really matter which way round it goes. We've got a pain component to deal with, but much, much more important, we've got a stress component to deal with. And the reason the stress component is more important is that the higher the stress levels are in our body, the more intense the pain symptoms are going to be, the more other issues are going to come up. So, with high stress also comes high inflammation, which can tend to cause more pain, whether that's just the brain makes everything hurt more because with inflammation you can't move as well, or could even be a physical thing. The more things inflame, the more nerves get compressed and tissues get compressed and things like that. Um, that could actually cause physical reasons for your pain symptoms as well. So that's basically just say most of this video is going to be talking about the stress side of things. The most important thing with fibromyalgia is to get some kind of a good start into things so that you see that some of these things can be influenced. Getting out of it's probably going to be a longer term thing, but if it comes to making a start, then stress is absolutely where we want to start. And when it comes to the types of things that we want to do in terms of reducing stress, this is where people tend to get a bit surprised because most of it actually is things that we can do internally and things that we can do for ourselves. Stress has a lot of different components. There are cognitive stressors, so things that we consciously think about that tend to stress us out. And that's usually going to be things like relationships, money, the environment around us. People say, I can't stand that noise. I'm worried about the argument that I'm having with my partner. I'm worried about paying rent, all of those kind of things. Those are cognitive stressors. They're the ones that we think about all the time, but they don't build up 100% of the stress that our body feels. Uh, the second type of stressors, which probably make up a great deal more of what our body feels, are physical stressors. So this is going to be things like, if I've got inflammation and all my tissues are bunched up, my body's going to feel stress because it can't move as well as it might like to. If my senses are not agreeing with each other. So, people talk about motion sickness when you're in a car, your eyes look at the seat in front of you and it looks like you're staying really still, but your inner ear, which is like a little spirit level for your body, it feels all the fluid kind of rushing back, and the little crystals are telling the body that no, you're not actually still, you're moving. And so when these two senses are disagreeing with each other, the brain starts to increase its stress levels because it has to make a decision to figure out what's really going on. And if it can't resolve that, then the reaction is usually something like anxiety, nausea, in some cases, even pain. So our sensory system, whether all the senses are agreeing with each other, if certain senses are diminished. So uh, let's say our balance is a really important one. If we are losing our balance, if our balance systems are underused or weaker because we spend a lot of time sedentary, we don't challenge it very much, then our brain is going to be really stressed because it's more likely that we're going to fall over if we're not paying attention. So every time we get distracted, our brain now has to work harder than it would like to, and that increases our stress levels. um, Physical stressors really make up a huge amount of the body's overall stress levels. And because we're not very often consciously aware of them, we usually tend to overlook them. And then the third aspect of stress that we usually don't think about at all, even though we are aware of it probably constantly, is our conscious reaction to the things that we experience. So you can have financial difficulties and you can have a positive outlook on that. Like, okay, cool. I've been in money trouble before. I've always figured it out. So I'm probably going to figure this one out. So I'm not going to worry too much about it. I'm just going to wait and see when the next opportunity comes up. Or I'm going to be proactive and I'm going to go out and look for jobs or sell something or something along those lines. Or you could have a more negative and judgmental attitude about it. You could say, you're in financial trouble again. You're always doing this. This is something that you should have learned by now. You're X whatever years old. You are constantly messing this up. Every single time at the start of the month, you say you're going to still have money saved by the end of the month. And every single time it gets to the end of the month, you're stressed out because you're running out of money. And then you start making impulse purchases. And this is basically all your fault. You should expect to be feeling bad about yourself and you should expect this level of stress because you're not on top of things and managing things. So, those are two different reactions to the exact same circumstance, but your brain's kind of monitoring your conscious thoughts at all times. And one of those uh, mindsets is going to tell the brain, hey, cool, everything's not fine, but it's gonna be. So we need to get out and take action and, give me all the good stuff. Give me the energy, give me the like regulate my blood pressure as nicely as you can because we're gonna go make stuff happen. And then the other one is like, we're in a bad situation and we don't know what we're gonna do. We're screwed basically. So the brain says, okay, cool. This is even worse than I thought it was. I'm going to elevate stress levels even more. So we got that kind of little trifecta of our cognitive stressors, our physical stressors, and our don't really know what I would call that one, our conscious stressors. And those three things are going to combine all on top of each other to inform the body how much we should be in this like fight or flight state. The cool thing about stress is that as far as the hypothalamus is concerned, it doesn't really matter which thing is causing the stress. It produces the same hormones regardless. So what that means is that if we just figure out the low hanging fruit, for example, we might find that, there's uh, some relationships we can repair pretty easily. Well, you got to apologize for something, ask a question, ask for help, something like that. There's some physical things that we can change pretty easily. So it might just be, hey, if we just go for a walk every day, actually we tick a load of boxes that we didn't used to. Uh, and then the brain feels like all of the uh, organs and senses are better prepared for danger. So it gets less stressed about that. And maybe there's some little things with our mindset, you just say, okay, I'm not going to judge myself for this, or I'm not going to react in the same way to this one little thing. And if that thing is something that happens every single day and you manage to get rid of it, then now you find that actually your stress levels might have reduced by like a whole 25% just from little things, even though all the big major problems in all of those areas are still there. So essentially, the first thing that we want to do is just figure out what are the easiest wins for reducing those kind of stressors. The cognitive ones, the ones that are coming from the outside world that we're very much aware of, you will usually find that those are the hardest to kind of change. The reason that you're putting all your attention on them is because a lot of the time they feel like these big impossible obstacles, and it's very, very difficult to get any momentum with sorting that stuff out. And so in that instance, any of your cognitive stressors, I will always tell people just make a list, and if there's any that you can easily cross off, cross them off, and then the rest of them, we're not going to worry about those for the remainder of the time. We're going to be more interested in what's going on in the physical, and the more interested in the what's going on in this like conscious, judgmental mindset level. So, in terms of the physical stuff, there are kind of two big wins when it comes to improving stress. Number one is going to be how we breathe. And number two is going to be our balance. So I've mentioned balance briefly already, but your brain really is very worried about you being able to stay upright all the time. Statistically, for most humans, the thing that will eventually get them in the end is a bad fall. Either it's going to be one where you hit your head and it's game over, or it could end up with breaking a bone, especially a big bone like the pelvis or something like that. That makes it very, very hard to keep going with anything. So your brain is very worried about falling. You have two options when it comes to keeping you upright. You've got your eyes, which like basically look to see a flat horizon, whether it's really near or really far. And you've got your inner ear, like I said, a little spirit level that's letting you know whether or not you're falling, whether or not you're moving, if you're spinning, going forwards, backwards, up, down. Those two things are communicating together with each other to just make sure that you're staying upright. Now, because of how we live as humans these days, we're very sedentary. The spirit level side of things tends to get really weak really fast. The less that we use it, the less reactive it gets. The brain doesn't see the point in fueling and energizing something that's not getting used. So it just kind of dims down and dims down and dims down. There's other things, if you get a concussion or if you get, lots of drugs or alcohol of any kind, or even like moving transport, loads of different reasons why your vestibular system, this little spirit level, would diminish over time. And when it does, suddenly the brain has to be much more vigilant. It can only really use the eyes for balance, but we want to use our eyes for tons of other things. So actually, even this becomes a bit of a problem. The response that the brain has to this is number one, it's going to adopt a more protective posture. So, you'll see yourself kind of like hunch over, and that brings the shoulders up to protect the head if you're going to fall. It kind of brings you closer to the ground. It'll tighten up the muscles so you can't actually move as fast. And what's that going to do? Well, that's going to raise your stress levels in other aspects because now your brain is physically aware that if you are in danger, you're not going to be able to run as fast. You're not going to be able to see it as quickly. You're not going to be able to react to anything as well as before. So, if there was one thing that I would give to anyone that is dealing with any kind of major stress, and with fibromyalgia, we're going to say it's basically a guarantee. You want to work on your balance. Okay. You can do it like just standard bring your feet together and close your eyes and see if you can balance like that. Then, one foot in front of the other, stand on one foot. Maybe even then start moving your head around and stuff like that, and just train your balance to be totally bulletproof where nothing can shake you. Or you can go a less kind of intense route and look at things like, yoga and Tai Chi and all those things that are around slow, controlled, intentional movements. All of those things are going to be really great at improving your balance. And it's one of the top reasons why it gets recommended all the time when it comes to improving chronic pain symptoms, is not because it's actually amazing for strengthening the muscles and the joints. It will do that, but actually because you're doing the balance work, you're probably doing some kind of breathing work, which we'll talk about in a second. But those things actually help calm the body down very significantly. So then the second thing that we can look at when it comes to stress reduction is basically how we're breathing. So your breath is one of the ways that your body gets fuel and energy to function throughout the day. And the amount of oxygen that you take into your lungs depends again on how much threat and danger your brain thinks you have at this moment. Okay. In order to fuel your body, you need glucose. So that's the sugar that goes up to your brain and actually gives you the energy. The oxygen is like the chemical that makes the explosion happen that creates the energy from the glucose. So, you know, glucose is kind of easier to manage. You can, if you don't have enough sugar in your bloodstream, your body can break down fats, it can break down muscle tissue, it can figure out a way to get glucose into your system. Oxygen, uh, it comes in and goes out, it doesn't get stored. So when you are under more threat and more danger, and your brain thinks, I'm going to need to create more fuel so that I've got more energy to get through this, it's going to want you to breathe faster and more often. The way it's going to do that is it's going to stop you breathing through your nose because your nostrils are pretty small. That slows down how much air can get in at one point, and it's going to make you start breathing through your mouth. When you start breathing through your mouth, you get a ton of oxygen in at any one time, but then you also have other problems that come up. So you don't get that kind of filtration going on. The air that comes in is not warmed to any degree, and you basically find that you get a lot of things that actually cause stress levels to go up, but your brain doesn't matter because you're in danger anyway. So actually, more stress means more adrenaline being produced, which means more action taken. And if you can get through the dangerous thing and then have time to calm down, that's ideal. But if you're finding that these stressors are coming up constantly, then you'll probably find that actually now this mouth breathing has become a more regular thing. So when we look at how we can manage stress, one of the top things we can do is look at breathing through the nose and also increasing the length of time that we're breathing in and out. So basically, when you breathe in, your heart rate increases. When you breathe out, your heart rate decreases. And a really nice exercise that I've found pretty helpful when it comes to fibromyalgia is an exercise called breath expansions. You can find it on our channel for free. There's a little follow along video. And the idea is you just breathe in for 1 second, breathe out for 1 second, then breathe in for two, out for two, breathe in for three, out for three, four, four, five, five. You get the idea. The challenge, I've found the best results when people build themselves up to being able to do this for 10 minutes. When you complete the 10 minutes, the final breath that you're going to take is a 24-second breath in and a 24-second breath out. And that's pretty difficult for most people. Most of the time, when I test people on this, around about the 12-second mark is where people start to find difficulty. And some people may get to like 15, 16, but most people by 16 have kind of bottled out of it. The reason I like this compared to the other kind of like calming breathing techniques that you see is we get to work on both aspects of the heart rate. The longer we're breathing in, the more our heart rate is going up, and that's going to stimulate the kind of stressful environment. As you're breathing in, heart rate goes up, stress levels start to increase. And then as you increase the breath out, immediately after, your brain is starting to figure out how to calm yourself down. So you get longer periods of stress followed by longer periods of relaxation. And what we're trying to teach the brain to do is to get better at relaxing after the stressful event. So when it comes to improving breath, that's the one exercise I would say this would be a really great start. It can do wonders for improving your physical stress levels, and this can, drop a good chunk of the stress off the top. If you want a tool for improving your balance, I would recommend this specifically. So this is our product, the Neuroband. Um, the the bracelet basically is just part of the tool. The course is where the magic is. It's basically a vision and balance training tool that looks at the eyes and the inner ear to help improve how they integrate with each other. So you get two basic like follow along videos that you can do. There's a warm up and a workout, and doing that daily can see your balance become much more unshakable than it was previously. And like I've already talked about, this is going to be really great for seeing your stress levels drop drastically. There is so many people that I work with that, this is the number one thing that I do. If you've watched more videos on the Rewire Guide, you'll see that I'm talking about improving balance specifically all the time. It's why we developed this tool and not something around breathing or something like that. It just seems to have the most actual benefits. If the price isn't right for you, we've made it as cheap as we possibly can, but you can also just search for more of our balance videos and work on that. And those two things, when it comes to physical stress, are the kind of two best starting points. The final thing that I'll talk about, we mentioned those, still don't have a word, conscious stress or mindset oriented stress. How you consciously approach the stress actually can create more stress. And the biggest thing that we want to learn when it comes to fibromyalgia is one, how to have self compassion. We'll deal with that last because that can be a little bit triggering for some people. The other side of it is how do you build evidence that you are getting better? Because you can have self compassion for yourself, but it's very hard to develop that if you feel like you're just stuck in this rut that isn't changing, or if things are just feel like they're constantly getting worse. And the real big problem with chronic pain is that things by definition are always going to feel like they're getting worse because our brain pays more attention to negative events than it does to positive events in order to improve our chances of survival. So when we are in pain, when we get like a flare up, and with fibromyalgia, this is like the big thing most people are familiar with is, you know, things feel fine, or, maybe not fine, but you've got your functioning days, and then you've got your flare up days where suddenly everything just goes 100 times worse, feels like you can't get through anything. It's hard to do any kind of movement, uh, all of it just sucks. As soon as you get those flare up days, your brain is basically wired and programmed to say, this is happening again. It's never getting better. It's hard for me to even think of the future when I've kind of written through this. But the actual truth is that the flare up happens, the peak happens, it starts to get better. You get a little bit of a rest period, and then another flare up's going to happen. And you just get these little spikes. If you plot them out on a graph, that's what it's going to look like. Now, if you're doing things to actively calm down your stress levels, what you are likely going to find is that these spikes still going to happen, but the intensity is going to start getting less over time. So you don't quite get into the worst possible place that you got in previously. And they're going to be a shorter duration, probably because if you don't have as high a peak to reach, it's easier to get down to the bottom. And you also might find that the gap between them starts to increase as well. That usually comes a little bit later from, I'm not speaking that from research, just from people I've worked with. It seems to be the intensity lowers first, then the gap gets bigger in between events. The problem is, if you're not plotting that graph, you got no idea of how things are comparing because your brain is just wired to think this is the worst, this is happening again, it's always like this, it's never getting better. So one of the best things that we can do is start to build up a bit of a training plan when it comes to the flare ups and those uh, times when things are really bad. The very first thing I always recommend people do is you want to write it down. Like, when does it start? When does it end? And if you can, it's a bit hard to judge, but what is the highest level? If you were to rate it out of 10, what number are you on? And feel free to go to 11 and 12 if you think one was 10 and then the next time's worse. Play with your scale. But collect the data, collect the information, because what you want to do is every time, next time the flare up comes, you want to go back and say, okay, well, how long was it since the last one happened or the last one finished? Is this actually getting shorter, or is the peaks dropping? And is it taking longer in between? If you start to find some evidence that things are getting a little bit better, it actually becomes a lot easier to deal with the second half, which is the self compassion and the uh, kind of not judging yourself, because you actually have some evidence that the work you're doing is putting you in the right direction. So some kind of notes is really really useful. Then when it comes to the self compassion side, usually when I start working with people with all kinds of chronic pain, but fibromyalgia especially, that's something I like to ask them to rate. Um, Very often, if I say on a scale out of five, five is the most self compassion, like you just don't judge yourself for whatever failures you go through. Uh, One is the lowest. Most people are one or two. That's pretty standard. Um, Improving self compassion is pretty hard because people start telling themselves things like, well, if you were actually doing the work, then you would deserve the compassion, but it doesn't really work like that. If you think of judging yourself, it's kind of hard to say if you weren't judging yourself, you would be getting. No, I said that. All right. It's kind of hard to say if you were getting better, then you wouldn't be judging yourself. If judging yourself, as we've talked about, is actually causing some of the stress that is keeping the pain levels high, uh, it's the only way that you get through it is by sorting out the judgment side of things first. Imagine having a problem and then giving yourself another problem by talking to yourself negatively about it. It makes the problem a bigger problem. It doesn't actually serve to do anything about it. You say, I've had this flare up, and you start chastising yourself for all the work you're not going to be able to do and that you're going to miss, and all of that. That just gives you more things to be sad about. You can already be sad about the fact that you're in pain. You don't need to add another problem or another issue on top of it to get through it. Now, the big problem with the self-compassion side of things, if it works well, basically what you want to be able to get to is a point where you have your flare up, you have the symptoms come back, and you say, okay, cool. That means, you know, I've just got to have a week of on the sofa, movies. I get to do nice things for myself. I just get to ride this out. And I know that it's going to stop. So I'm just going to do whatever gets me through it in the nicest way. Most of the time, though, people aren't able to do that because they haven't been used to other people showing them that compassion. Very often, when we talk about fibromyalgia, it comes from being judged in the past very often. If there's high stress levels, high trauma, high things like that, then people judging you in the past has led to you thinking you're not good enough, you don't deserve this, you are not capable of being better, etc. And actually, that's a big problem. When you see most people teach about self-compassion, they say, okay, I want you to treat other people the way you would like to be treated. But what if you've always been treated like crap? How do you know what is the right way to treat other people that is also the way that you would like to be treated? And that can be pretty tricky. So the number one thing when it comes to self-compassion is you've got to figure out exactly what that phrase means. What ways can you treat other people that if they were to reciprocate it to you, you would actually enjoy? Because then that's the way that you need to start treating yourself. Some people do better when they actually try this on others. So, you know, rather than working on yourself first, you actually go to other people and it's like, okay, that person's having a bad time, they're in trouble. I'm going to treat them with kindness in a non-judgmental way, not like bending over backwards for them, not offering them loads of stuff that's causing you a bunch of stress, but just being like, "Hey, you're having a bad day. Cool. What do you need from me? Like, we can hang out. We can, don't judge yourself. Don't feel guilty about doing X, Y, Z. We're just going to get through it, and then we're going to move on." Other people work better with trying things for themselves. So when you get a flare up coming up, just go like, all right, this is going to happen anyway. I'm going to have to get to the end of this. So what do I do right now? Uh, might as well choose something positive over something negative. So is it, I get for the next 3 days, I'm just going to watch movies back to back and I'm going to start stockpiling up things that I want to watch. And I'm not going to align myself until I have the flare up. And actually, the flare up comes and I'm like, oh, cool. I get to have this kind of not nice, but a day that I wouldn't have got to have otherwise. So this is like the treat aspect of getting through it. And you start giving yourself these kind of physical things that kind of show you it's like the pain isn't going away anyway. So you get to do the nice thing at the same time. Over time, that starts to translate to being able to change your own self-talk. So it stops having to become a physical thing and it just starts to becoming like, okay, cool, you're in pain. It's not your fault. You didn't decide this. Uh, we're going to wait until the pain dies off. And then we're going to just get back on the horse and do whatever actions we need to do to reduce the size of the flare ups in the future so we can get back on the breath training, back on the balance training. We don't have to worry about that now when things are really bad, because I trust you to get after it when you're physically ready and able. Once you've got into the habit of doing that, it only takes a couple of times before when you realize, oh, cool, actually, when I didn't overload myself with additional stress through this flare up, it actually got better. Then the next time, especially if after, once you were feeling better, it's like, oh, cool, well, I feel good about that. I'll do that little breathing exercise, I'll do the balance exercise. And then you get to the next time, well, now you don't have to just blindly trust yourself because you just proved it to yourself that you could do that. And you get to do it again and again and again. And the kind of self compassion goes up, but also your motivation to do the work to get out of it goes up as well. So I'm going to leave it there because that was a lot longer than I intended to go through. If anyone does have any questions, you can leave them in the comments. If you want to chat privately, you can find me on Instagram, rewire_ND, or you can email info@rewirend.com. And if you are interested in doing any of that work for fibromyalgia, search fibromyalgia rewire in our channel. There's a few different videos from a course that I've made for a company called Practical Wisdom. I would recommend checking out the Neuroband. The link is below. And I'd also search for the breath expansions exercise. because that is probably going to be the quickest and easiest one that you can do. So, thanks very much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.